third form, older universities. This is what I'm calling dispositional and transdisciplinary knowledge. Older university agendas, it's very much about the educated person. There's no end point as such, because of course, if you think about technical rationality or work in the workplace and so on, there's very much an end point, isn't there? That is the improvement of practice. Application is uncertain. The practicum as the source of an arena for theoretical knowledge. But it's about the development of those dispositions which contribute to us as academics. And clearly that is important for a newcomer to the field, that is someone who is doing a doctorate and who might use that doctorate to enter the field itself. That is the academic field, the disciplinary-based academic field. And then finally there is, and I think very importantly, that some people see knowledge, and of course many philosophers see knowledge like this, which is very much in a critical mode. That is, that knowledge is not something that can be given. It has been developed over time and has some sort of settled basis, but knowledge actually is very much a moving feast. And therefore, of course, they're much more concerned, that is, those who subscribe to critical realist perspectives or critical perspectives of different sorts, to political and change orientation, to institutional reform. It's driven by values, and it's non-technicist knowledge. So those four characteristics, if you like, of critical knowledge, some people here, in the particular subfield that many of you belong to, which of course is the leadership field within education, still might subscribe to this particular view of knowledge. And many of you in the audience here are doing doctorates yourselves, and therefore that may be the raison d'etre of what you're doing. That may be. But don't forget, these are sort of these four modes of knowledge. They have loose boundaries between them. It's not just a question of, you are in one of them and you're not in the other three. They are characterizations of knowledge modes that students find themselves within, whether they're doing a PhD, whether they're doing a practice-based doctorate or a professional doctorate. And of course, there are integrating tendencies of all of these, because knowledge moves forward. The integrating tendencies I've characterized as of three types: adaptation, colonization, and reversed colonization. And what I mean by adaptation is that the professional doctorate, the practice-based doctorate, has actually had a profound effect on the development of knowledge within the university itself. I'm beginning to run out of time. Okay. Okay. So there are various forms of adaptation. Colonization clearly is when the pressures on students are, in terms of the discipline, colonizing, taking over, making sure it survives the profession itself. And there is a form, if you like, of reverse colonization, when it's the practice setting which is prioritized. And that has a huge influence, if you like, on the nature of knowledge being developed within the doctorate itself. Now, I do want to move on really very smartly, just to talk very briefly about the influence of government, because I mentioned it briefly at the beginning. And what I said was, it's not just a question of academics being able to control the type of knowledge they want developed on the doctorates. It's not just a question of the profession being able to develop, being able to control the type of knowledge that is being developed on the doctorate. It's also about governments, and it's governments having particular agendas. And those agendas come out to some extent within the professional doctorate. And what have we got here? We've got some new moves about the structure of the thesis itself. First of all, taught elements to the PhD. We can ask ourselves the question, is this always to the benefit of the PhD student? I mean, I've introduced a number of professional doctorates within a number of universities, and there has been a clear resistance by some people to what they see as an inferior doctorate. It's not a proper doctorate. Professional development, again a government move, is being tied in quite closely to all the doctorates. So it's part of your career. It's a requirement that you consider the doctorate in relation to the professional development of the student. And finally, a quotation that I liked from a colleague of mine when he talks about an increasing bureaucratization within doctoral programs of pedagogic sequence, of pedagogic relations, through memoranda, and of knowledge into training methods. And again, we have this move, if you like, again, by governments, this move from education to training. And there is a training program, and there are people in universities that their job is to, if you like, train PhD students. Now again, the word itself, to some extent, has taken on, the two words, education and training, have taken on many different meanings, clearly. But I think there is some movement and some significance in the notion of moving from education into training methods. There is the time element we've got here, the control of time. There is the inspection element, the inspection of the PhD, of the work of the PhD and professional doctorate student at different points. There is a tighter bureaucratic control, and therefore this is going to affect, and is affecting, I think, the type of knowledge produced within the doctorate. Again, there are various forms of control. Accountability relations, it seems to me, are much more now directed towards the supervisor. I mean, this is common to a number of other different types of degree. But if I had, for example, failed my PhD, I don't think it would have impacted very much on the reputation of my supervisor. Whereas now I think there is a much greater emphasis on the idea of the supervisor being much more responsible for the successful completion of the PhD by their student. Again, closer relations with employment markets, increased numbers of registrations and completions, and the final point that you can see on the screen, which is a greater control by the state over forms of legitimate knowledge. Now, I'd just like to sort of rephrase that, really. It's much more actually about a greater attempt by the state to retain, to increase their control over forms of legitimate knowledge. It's very interesting. I mean, I was reading in the newspaper this morning about how David Cameron, the Prime Minister, is very keen that the ESRC should fall in with the agenda of the new coalition government. And it's to do with the big society, and you may have read about it, some of you may have read about it, which is that the ESRC agenda now has to very closely fit with the agenda of the coalition government. And of course, the state is beginning to extend its tentacles in all sorts of ways. Now, what I'm suggesting is that here is a significant attempt by the state to do just that. But there are other bodies that are working, if you like, against the interests as the state sees it, their own interests. And those bodies are academics, they are the professions, and of course, they're also students themselves. I just want to end by talking about the notion of supervisory practices. Because the point I made earlier on was that supervisory practices